Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for making me your artist of the week. It really is an honor, especially being from here, from this area.
Oh yeah. Just hold off before you start going into
Cool.
detail. Everybody's still joining. Everybody, we want to see your lovely faces. It's okay. Nobody bites here. You can keep your mic on mute, but we'd like to see you if you want to share. Hey, Karen. Karen, what class do you teach?
This is my World Lit 2 class. It looks like most of them are here and they're a little shy. I think all of them except for Emmeline maybe are my students. But we've been trying to get more contemporary writers like you, Brian, because we just use public domain readings. Mm-hmm. And so we need 21st century writers like you. And they're so excited to have a sci-fi fantasy writer. So we're all excited.
Thank you. Today. Thank you. I do my best. It's a great time for fantasy and science fiction. We got all these great new authors coming out, and all sorts of different takes on the genre. You got guys everywhere from Nicholas Eames all the way to Evan Winters, who do it with bringing African mythology. It's just a really great time for genre fiction. And there's Tom Rydell. He's a friend of mine. But yeah, I'm really happy to be in it. It's a great time to be a fantasy author.
Okay, we're still admitting people. We'll get started about 2:05 just to give people time to join because I still got people joining.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Yeah, all sorts of folks as this is.
Mm-hmm.
And I was independently published. I did my own publishing for a long time until I crossed over to the dark side and signed with Tor Books, the fantasy arm of Macmillan.
I wouldn't call that the dark side.
Depends on who you ask. Actually, Tor's great. Tor's awesome. I have friends that are with other publishers, of course, like Orbit, and some of the other parts of what's called the Big Five, and they tend to be a little more corporate, and Tor tends to be almost like the hippie renegades of the of the publishing world. And then they have so many. Being part of that legacy is just amazing. I'm not thinking I'm gonna have the same claim to fame as the Terry Goodkinds who passed away recently of the world or anything like that. It'd be great, but it's awesome to know that my name is up there on the same list as they are, and it will always be up there. That's something that nobody can ever take away from you. It's awesome. So how many people we got? We got 8, 9, 10, 11.
We got 18.
18 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right.
One's Mariana tried to join, but it seems like she had technical issues, but she was trying to join just a little bit.
I managed to get in.
She managed to get in.
Oh, she got in. There she is. Because I was watching her trying, and I was like, okay, we'll give her a chance because we're going to start in just a minute, and I'll do a little countdown because we do record these,
okay.
And then we upload them to YouTube so that you can view them later. The YouTube page is USA Libraries Art Galleries. That is our location on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube, and on where else am I? We're everywhere. We're a lot of places. So be sure to join us there and watch this there as well. Okay, here we go, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. And the countdown is 1, 2, and 3. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome so much to the USA Libraries, Art Galleries, Writer Talk. Now, I know we're a little different. We've done artists, but we're branching out and we're growing in a time of COVID where we are learning to do things differently and try different things. This is another branch out that we're doing. We're going to start inviting writers and having them come and talk with people. And our first one to sign up is Brian D. Anderson, which we are so grateful, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us today. So,
I was just saying, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm from the area. I grew up in Spanish Fort, and I live in Fairhope. And being anything to do with what's my hometown is it's such an honor for me. So I appreciate y'all having me.
Well, thank you. Now, we had talked a little bit about the subject you wanted to maybe talk about earlier. Do you want to just start with that and maybe give you a little bit of history?
Well, let me get first, I guess, I'll give you a little background on who I am and what I do and what I've been doing over the past decade as a working writer. And I would like, before we get started, to say that I love these virtual events. I get to do this from the comfort of my home, and everybody else gets to wonder if I'm wearing pants. And I am. But dude, am I really? So I started. I don't have a background in writing as far as a formal background in writing. I didn't go to school to be a writer. I always sort of had a flair for it. I wrote a lot of short stories when I was younger and when I was going to college. I enjoyed it, but I never took it seriously as a profession. And at the time, it really didn't seem like a viable thing for me. This was, I'm 48 years old, so there was no, the technologies and the avenues into becoming a professional writer didn't exist in those days. And so later on, but I always wrote as a sort of a hobby and way to blow off steam creatively. And my wife always was at me to take it more seriously. But, I sort of blew it off. And I had other ambitions in mind at the time. And it wasn't until my son came up to me when he was about 7 years old, and I was writing some weird quirky little short story. And and I'd been doing a lot of writing. And of course, as a child does, he wanted to be part of what his dad was doing. And he said, "Hey, Dad, hey, can I want to tell you this, an idea for a story I have." And I'm trying to be a good dad. I was a little irritated, but, because I didn't feel like stopping doing what I was doing. So I guess I'm not that great a dad. But I stopped, and what he told me was so good that I said, absolutely, I'll absolutely write this. And, I had to change a lot of stuff. He was 7, of course, what I mean?
Yeah.
But what started as him running up with that kind of excitement that only a 7-year-old can have turned into a 6-book, about to be 8-book series that launched an indie career. Now, at the time, independent publishing was just getting its legs under it. You had guys like Michael J. Sullivan, David Dalglish. They had made the transfer over from indie into traditional publishing, and they're still doing great work. Hugh Howey broke the internet with Wool. So independent publishing was becoming a viable option. And I got in right around 2011 during that time. And since then, my indie career has just really took off. I sold about close to anywhere between 500,000 to 750,000 books over the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. And which doesn't put me at the level of, George Martin, but it afforded me a comfortable living. And since then, I got an agent. Thanks to Michael J. Sullivan, he introduced me to my wonderful agent, Miss Lori McLean over at Fuse Literary. And she stuck by me. She saw something in my writing. And even though at the time I was still very raw, mm-hmm. and but I learned a lot. And, just from writing. That's by the way, that is the best way to learn, is to do it. You write. You're not going to get you're not going to get better as a writer unless you're writing. And that's pretty obvious advice that everybody's going to tell you. But then I tried for several years to break in traditional publishing, and got rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter. And finally, I broke in with my first book of the Sorcerer's Song, The Bard's Blade. And that happened last year when I signed a 3-book deal with Tor Books. And so now I'm making the transition from being a full-blown indie to being a hybrid. I'm still putting out indie works, but I'm also have my legs in the traditional world as well, which is becoming more common. You have a lot of authors that were strictly traditional for many, many years who are doing some indie publishing too. And vice versa. You have people like me who started out as an indie who are also doing some traditional publishing. It's become an interesting and wonderful time in publishing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do have a question real quick. Do you ever write fan fiction, Brian?
I do not. I wouldn't. It's not something that really interests me to write in somebody else's world. The closest I ever came to that was a good friend of mine, Russell Blake. He wrote a series called Jet. He writes action adventure, and he actually co-authored a couple books with Clive Cussler, and brilliant writer. He years back, Amazon had this thing called Kindle Worlds, and he asked me. They set up a Kindle world for his Jet series, and he wanted some actual writers to write the first few stories, and so I wrote a short, something like 20,000 words. More as a favor to him than anything I actually wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But I get it. I love fanfic. If that's your thing, absolutely. So it can be a lot of fun. It's a good way to learn world building and learn how to get your feet wet with character interaction and character development. But it's just not something, especially with my workload, it's not something I would even have time to do. And again, I've created so many of my own worlds that I think I'd feel funny, doing that.
Another question. Do you ever write, will you introduce us to your world and read some of your writing?
Sure. I might do that a little later if we have time. I'm happy to do that. If you, see, I have a couple of the books right here. I have the Akiri series right here. That's what some I co-authored with Stephen Saville. Stephen's brilliant writer. He wrote for Pathfinder and Warhammer, and he actually wrote in the Doctor Who franchise and the Sherlock Holmes franchise. And working with him was a really cool experience. And me and him, we're still very good friends to this day. But I'll if we have time, I'll definitely read a few paragraphs. Though my reading out loud for me is a struggle because I read faster than I speak, and I often stumble over words. And I didn't realize how much of a skill that was until I started doing public appearances and readings and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Which mostly I do panels and Q&A, not dissimilar to this, but usually live, of course. This year all 17 cities that I was supposed to go to got canceled.
Okay. Oh, I know. Now, we have talked in the past, and we actually do have on our USA Libraries Art Galleries YouTube page a whole interview with you doing world building. So if you want to learn in depth about world building, you can go back there and view that recording that we did. It's very informative, and it goes into great detail about that. If you're more interested in that, it's fabulous. So visit the page and watch the video. You're going to love it because it talks about how he creates the worlds and universe and such. Brian, if you want to touch on that just a little bit.
Well, world building, what I explained in the last, I use the same method as a lot of writers, which is kind of like we call it the iceberg method. And you have to kind of decide what your learning curve is going to be, how you're going to introduce your world. Some of the easier ways to do this are like what you see in, say, Harry Potter, where you have Harry. He is completely ignorant of the wizarding world, and you learn about it as he does. So you're sort of eased into becoming an expert at this world. And the goal is to have the reader become an expert in the world. Now, there's a lot of things that the reader won't know and probably will never know. What happens? Excuse me. What happens when one of the fundamental mistakes that's made is a writer will think that they need to explain everything to keep the interest of the reader, and they have to let them know all the details of this world, and it's just not true. Mm-hmm. Brandon Sanderson, who's one of my favorite writers, does this kind of thing brilliantly when he opens up with the Way of Kings. You see Adolin. He has slave brands on his forehead. He's in a wagon. He's captured. He's talking about things like rock buds and spren, and all these different things that are in this world. He doesn't tell you what it is. You do learn what it is, but he exposes you to it at a pretty steep learning curve. And there's several writers who do this. Some of them, it depends on what type of reader you are, to what you enjoy. Some writers really throw you down into the middle of a world without any knowledge whatsoever. And then you have these kind of people who really dig world building, and they are just all about the world building. They'll spend days, months, weeks, years. Did that in wrong order. Yes, but you get my point. And building this world, and they want to show it off. They've done all this work on this world, and they want to show it off. And they end up having information dump after information dump after information dump that they don't need, just because they are are so proud of the world they've built, and they want to show it off. In reality, in the first 100,000 words of a novel, and I know that sounds like a lot of words, but depending on what you're writing, it may not be. You're only going to really be able to touch in any kind of significant detail 5 or 6 aspects of your world, and still be able to maintain a decent pace. That because if you try to explain everything, one of the bad things that happens is you slam the brakes on the story. You make people start feeling like they need to jump ahead just to find out what happens next, and that's not what you want to do. So that goes into establishing pace, establishing a tone and rhythm, which is has to do with world building, but it's not something that it would take me a long time to cover. So I have what you need to do if you're what's called a pantser is the same thing a plotter does, but you just do it as you go. You have your iceberg. You have your learning curve. Everything above the water is what the reader knows. Everything below the water is what the reader doesn't know that you know, and it helps inform you of how to move the story forward. But you can also use this as great ways to keep the interest of the reader. You say, for example, I use this as an example all the time. It's a little thing I came up with. Guy wakes up. He's in bed. He reaches over, picks up this pendant that the clasp was broken and it has a big dent in it. He's really angry about that. So he gets up out of bed, has some breakfast, gets dressed, shoves it in his pocket. He hears this high-pitched squeal as he's walking out his door and smells a sickly sweet odor, right? These are things you're telling the reader. Now, he leaves his little hovel, turns down an alley, gets mugged by 3 muggers who he recognizes as being bad guys in his little part of town. He fights hard, and they steal the pendant from him, and they beat him unconscious. He wakes up in bed with his family around him, and the constable's there. And he tells the constable he doesn't know who mugged him. He was on his way back from getting the pendant fixed. And okay, What I've done here, and you know nothing about this world hardly, but I've created all these questions that I can give you the answer to as I go along, and I don't have to do it all at once. This is part of your world building. And I'd say the high-pitched squeak is an insect that only comes out in the spring. So I'm telling you something about the world there. Say the odor is a fungus that grows in really nasty areas. So I'm telling you not only that he lives in a nasty area, but I'm also saying something about his socioeconomic status, something about the city. I'm letting you know a lot of things with only a little bit of information. The big question is, why is that pendant so important? Why didn't he give up? Why didn't he say, yeah, I knew who stole it from me? Why did he say it was being repaired when you know it was stolen? Mm-hmm. So I've created all these questions in your mind through my world building, and without giving away a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what I could very well say, hey, the pendant was something that you need to have on you. The head of each household uses it to buy, sell, and trade. Without it, he's going to end up homeless, can't even buy food for his family. That's why he told the constable it was being repaired and not stolen, because he's going to try himself to get it back. So but I'm not telling you that right now. I let that question linger in your head for a while. See, new writers, they will panic and they will feel that they need to tell you this information, and they forget often when they're reading that this kind of information is something in the books that they enjoy, that writer's not doing that. You're not going to lose the interest of the reader if you're telling a compelling story that moves forward and moves at a decent pace and has interesting characters. You're not going to lose them just because you're not committing the sin of information dumps. Anyway, let's see. Do we have our books in the library?
I don't think so. I'll have to talk to them about it. I don't even, because we're an academic library. But if there's a way around this, Karen, if you will request them as faculty to be added to the library, we will purchase them.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to do
that. So Karen, she's got it.
I could probably have McMillan just send y'all some. That shouldn't be a problem.
Hey, Karen, can you type the mailing address into the chat for Brian, where he can mail them if he did?
You can just email it to me. Oh, you got my email address? So yeah, I'll have. Yeah. Where do I come up with the ideas? In a drug-induced haze. No, I'm just kidding.
There are moments.
I'm just kidding. That's a joke. But now, you know what? Here's the thing about ideas and about an idea for a story. I'll have 100 ideas, and only a quarter of them end up worthy of exploring to an outline. And only one of them will end up worthy of a book. And having a really cool idea for a story isn't the same as having an idea for a book. And not that you should abandon ideas. You should always write them down, because you may find later that you can expand on it and explore it more. But what I typically do, if I'm sitting on my back porch, having a drink, just relaxing, and something will come to me. And I'll sit there and I'll think about it for a while, and I'll explore some basic plot points and some see how well it works out. And then I'll jot it down, the core idea. And if it sticks with me for a few days and I can't get my mind off of it, I'll try to explore it further. I may write a few pages and to see how it feels. May try to expand. And
that leads to a question that I did have. What tools do you use to write? I mean, all writers have different methods and different ways of storing that information, or like they have that spur of the moment inspiration, or they're wherever they're at. So everybody has different things. Is there a tool thing or practice?
I use Microsoft Word and Post-it notes. There's some great programs out there, like Scrivener. There's Grammarly we were discussing earlier. There's some good tools out there. I'm just not very computer savvy. I mean, I began trying to when I first tried to write my first book. I was 11 years old, and I failed miserably. But I did it on a typewriter. And then by the time I got into my, then I tried to wrote a bunch of poetry that almost got me committed. I'm serious. I wrote a bunch of dark poems when I was a teenager on this Apple computer word processor. And my mother found it years later and thought they were recent and thought I was suicidal. I had to explain to her, no, I wrote that a long time ago. I'm not suicidal. I wasn't suicidal when I wrote it, and I'm not now. Suffice to say, I stopped writing poetry. But just because of the way I came up writing, Microsoft Word's about the simplest program there is out there. And so, I take, as I'm coming up with fleshing out a world, I have certain pages, places, things, important aspects of the world, and I try to keep them on separate lists, and I try to keep where in the story it is so I don't have to search back through it. Because I started out as a pantser, and for those of you who don't know, there's plotters and pantsers, and there's gray areas in between that, of course. But basically, a pantser is what they called a discovery writer, I think the more technical term for it. But where you're sitting down and you're just seeing where organically the story takes you. Pantsers, Sanderson, bring him up again. He is a plotter. He writes down every last detail of every book, and which, if you're able to do that, it's great, because it makes writing the book a lot easier, because all you're doing, because you already have your story, and basically you're just filling in the gaps. I'm somewhere in between that. I come up with a core idea, key plot points, and I try to organically go from one plot point to the next. Now, as a writer, that a lot of guys are like me, and if you start getting out there and into the publishing world, what you're going to find is publishers do not like that. They like to know what you're going to write before you write it. So when you're writing a synopsis, they're going to want to know some more detail, but you shouldn't let that discourage you or get panicky about that, because if they like your writing and they like your story, they tend to be really cool with you. Going, hey, I have a better idea. I'm not going to do this anymore. It worked at the time, but I think, then you did. That's conversations you have with your editor, and depending on what background you're coming through, how that plays out. From my end, I had to let go of a lot of ego, and because I was basically in 100% control of all my writing at all times for many years, and there was nobody who could really override me or put up much of a fight if I wanted to do something and they said, no, yeah, that's not all that great. I tried to listen to people when I would get beta testers and hire editors, but beta testers and editors were still under my employ. Mm-hmm. So I really didn't have a compelling reason to listen to them if I didn't want to. Mm-hmm. Whereas an editor with a traditional publisher, they have invested into you, and they have a lot more say in what will and will not be allowed to be published. Now, a good editor has a relationship with their writer, and if an editor is really good, like Lindsay Hall, who's my editor over at Tor, I remember her sending me back the first round of notes, and I was screaming bloody murder at that computer and calling her names that I would never call to her face. And because you're going to make me do what? But I had to let go of my ego and realize that she was a senior editor for a reason, that she was not, that she's read thousands of books and I had to realize that, yes, they signed me because they saw something in my work, but they also have their own areas of expertise, and I need to let go of a piece of that control to make the book better. And it did. In the end, it really, really did. The Bard's Blade, for example, the original intro was one of the main characters' mother, pregnant with him, running through the forest, being chased by people by hounds. I was following traditional, conventional wisdom of starting off with a bang, which, especially in indie writing, actions is a lot more important, and a faster pace can be a lot more important. You learn your audience after a while. And, but she came back and says, hey, well, that's great. That's all great and well and good. But could you do, and what she described to me, let's dive some more into the character and the way they are living and, and about where their home is, blah, 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 blah. And I said, so you want me to kind of do a long expected party? And she goes, yeah. Well, I'm like, I can do that. I'm not going to write it like Tolkien, obviously. But yeah, I can get that feel, it's not a problem. I was skeptical. And, but in the end, the major changes that they asked of me, made the books a lot better. And at the same time, if I pushed back on something, I learned when to push back and when to accept what I was being told. That if it was important to me, I had to, if there was something that I wanted to include that was important to me, I pushed back, and I generally won the, if I felt strongly about it, I won the argument. But there were decisions we made together, like to fade to black on the sex. There wasn't much of an issue in the first book, but the second book, it would have been. And it's not YA, but we wanted to reach a broader audience, and there was no value in showing the sexual interaction to the story, so not that I could see. And I've written sex into my books before, and it was not, but it was always integral and important to the story I was telling. But we faded to black on that, and those kind of decisions were made by long discussions and who we thought we were trying to reach. Did the publisher come after you were a successful? Yes, it did. I was an indie for almost 9 years before I signed with Tor, and the indie, we'll call it kind of the indie explosion. There was independent publishing long before I was an indie, but it really took off between 2010 and 2012. And you had some great talents coming out, telling stories that traditional publishing either didn't want to tell, or for whatever reason. They have a lot of reasons not to publish a book. And that's another thing. If you're going to go into this and you're going to go try to get published, there's a lot of reasons a publisher will say no. And it's not always because the book is bad. In fact, most of the time, it's not because of that. Now, with a major publisher, with the exception of certain times a year where they will allow for what's called unsolicited submissions, most major publishers require agented submissions. So you're not going to get, if an agent, a reputable agent who knows these publishers and these editors well enough to have them read your manuscript, your writing ability is not going to be much in question at that point, and your ability to write at a professional level has become, a given. Now, stylistically, that's a different story, but they're going to be looking at whether or not your style of writing is something that particular agent enjoys, whether or not it's a story they like. Have they published other books like yours? What is they're going to look at what's trending. If you have a hero's quest about a magic donkey, and somebody else has a hero's quest about a magic horse that they just published, well, I mean, one may be a donkey and one may be a horse, but it's going to be similar enough to where they're not going to want to do that. So being rejected by a publisher isn't always about the quality of the work. And it can really go all the way down to the editor just not having a good day. These are human beings. They're not, they're not robots. I don't know if this is something that the people listening would be interested in, but the process of going through traditional publishing can be very frustrating. It can be very long and drawn out. Mine was not that experience, but I've been doing this a long time, so I have firsthand accounts of all sorts of different experiences with traditional publishing. When you submit to an editor, that editor has to make what that editor will do is they'll read the first little bit of your manuscript, and first they're going to read the pitch letter. But that's a whole different discussion. But say you get past the pitch letter, you get all the way to the fact that they're reading your manuscript. They're going to read the first little bit, and if they're compelled to keep reading, they will. Mm-hmm. Now and if they love it and want to publish it, that doesn't mean you're going to get published. That means you get to the next step. That means they take it to a meeting, that they're now going to pitch it to their boss, and they're going to try to convince their boss to allow this to move forward. Now, if it gets past that stage, say the boss, okay, they're convincing. A lot of times they'll hand it off to other editors and have them read it first to make sure that they're on track, because an editor's career is definitely tied to the authors in a very real way. Not every book has to be a bestseller, but if too many bad decisions will find an editor in hot water. So they're going to want to make damn sure that an offer is something that they want to do. So say it does get past that stage. Then they're going to send you something called a deal memo. They're going to send that to your agent. Your agent's going to pass it on to you. And what that is going to be, say, we're going to offer you X amount of money per book for however many books. They're going to give you the terms of paid this much upon signing, upon turning in each manuscript, and upon release. And it'll detail out it won't detail, it'll give you the broad strokes of the publishing contract. The actual contract is a lot more involved. But then you talk over with your agent whether or not the deal is acceptable. And if the agent thinks that they can get more or a better deal, then the process continues. Now, this can take a very long time, and it can be very frustrating. But what you have to understand is even getting an agent can be difficult. One of the wonderful things about indie publishing is that if you feel that you want to put your work out there, it does give you the opportunity to do that and put your work directly into the hands of the reader and let them decide. Now, the misconception is that indie publishing is an easier, quicker way to fame and fortune and success, or an easier way. It is a quicker way. It is not easier. Because I promise you that if you go out and put a piece of unedited, ill-conceived trash on Amazon with some homemade cover that your nephew made on Photoshop, and didn't bother to get a real editor to unproofread, just errors, grammatical typos, all those errors in it, and you put out there, you're not gonna do well, and there's so many people that think that if they just put it up on Amazon, that's the path. First of all, indie publishing isn't for everyone. Indie publishing moves at a very, very fast pace compared to traditional publishing. Not every writer is cut out for that. The enormous pressure that you're under to keep producing work is especially if you are, say you're an editor, a writer that your maximum capacity is a book every year, and say your first book is really good, and people buy it. So, if you're not going to have another book out for a year, your notoriety is going to fade. You're going to have to basically start over again every time you put out a book. Whereas people don't have that expectation in traditional publishing. There are writers who put out a book every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. And depending on how you craft your stories, are you any good at marketing? Because all the things that a publisher does, all these things, they still got to get done. It's just now you got to do it. So if you don't have that sort of split business creative mind, indie might not be the path you should choose. Now, that puts you back in traditional publishing, which I say it drags on. You know, if you got to the deal memo stage, you still may be 3 or 4 months before you're signing a contract, sometimes even longer. And a lot of people get impatient, especially nowadays. Let's see. How many editors, publishers have you had in your career? Okay. I've had one traditional editor, Lindsay Hall. I was supposed to have Davy Pillai, but she got promoted. And I have had several indie editors. Most of them I worked with only for a short time at the beginning of my career. They were not most of them weren't qualified. In those early days, finding qualified editors was very difficult. People would, I tried to, hey, your high school English teacher is not an editor. An editor is an editor. That's a specific skill set that, but hell, most people don't even know the different types of editing there are. They don't understand the difference between line editing, copy editing, and developmental editing. So you got to understand what you need. But I've narrowed it down to I work with, on my indie work, 2 different editors, a guy named George Stratford and a lady named Dorothy Zamont. Dorothy, I brought over as my copy editor for Tor because she already worked with Macmillan Education and as well as Pearson. She writes textbooks and brilliant woman. She worked with Russell Blake. She worked with I forget her name. Libby Hawker, who I think Libby was nominated for a Pulitzer, and she actually made her own career, writes these textbooks, then travels the world teaching teachers how to teach out of them. So it's a great life she has. But I brought her over to Tor, so right now I work with 3 editors, but in total, I probably worked with close to a dozen. Most of them no more than a page or 2 before I went, nope.
Yeah. Now, there's things that a lot of writers, especially in the beginning, don't realize is that you cannot edit your own work at all.
Yeah, it's called another draft.
Right. You can't. It's hard to do. You want to because you think, I'm close to the subject, but that is the problem, is that you're too close to the subject. Right, Brian?
Yeah, I call it too close to see clearly. You don't see what's wrong with the story. One of the things you can do, though, to make life easier on you and whoever you choose to edit your work, because you also, it's important to remember, if you're going to go to the traditional route, you don't want to send them basically what amounts to raw footage. You want to have it as clean as you can possibly get it before you send it to them. That means you might consider using an editor or using a beta readers or, and proofreaders and things like that. But anyway, God, I fell off the train of thought just now. Oh, gosh.
Now at South,
So
we actually,
you want
but
to.
at South we actually have writing labs, so that kind of helps with that.
Yeah,
So
it really does. Here's the thing. I was actually thinking earlier today something I wanted to bring up, especially since I knew there was going to be a English professor here. Um, and I think you'd agree with me. One of the problems that people have when they join writers groups, which writers groups are great. They're a great way to bounce critique, get critiques from other people to find out where you're going right, where you're going wrong. But you also have to know how to be a member of a writers group. You don't want to be prescriptive. You don't want to, okay, well, if I read you a short story and I don't need to hear what you would have done. I need to hear what you liked and what you did not like. And what happens in a lot of these readers groups, especially on a more amateur level, just, a bunch of people meeting at a library, which that's great, but it goes off the rails a lot of times because all that happens is they start talking to each other. Well, when you did this, you should have done that. No, that's not what you're not supposed to, that's not the kind of input that person needs. That person needs to hear what you liked and why, what you didn't like and why. And you don't need, that writer doesn't care how good a writer you are. That person is trying to get better at their craft. So being a part of these writers groups, learning to be a good member is important, I think.
Now, Karen, if you want to contribute, please feel free to. She's good.
Oh no! You're the professor. I'm not. If you have a differing opinion, I am happy to entertain the idea.
Yes. Okay. So she's good.
Okay.
I agree totally. I've been in a lot of writing workshops, and that is exactly it. You nipped it in the bud. What they would have done rather than for you to how to improve your writing. So that's excellent advice.
Yeah, I think when it's almost not people's fault though, because everybody is, especially when you're getting started, you kind of have stars in your eyes and you have visions about where you're going to be, and you're hearing somebody else's story, especially if you sort of like it, and you think you're giving them positive input, but you're just not, and it's rarely intentional when people do that. And I think it's why it's kind of better to have a moderator of these groups, somebody who can sort of put the brakes on that kind of thing. And you also got to be prepared if you're going to join to get your feelings hurt. And when you're a writer and you're putting your creative juices to the test, not everybody's going to appreciate it, and not everybody's going to like what you do. And if you are unable to take criticism, even constructive criticism, I've seen people break down in tears over the most innocent comments. This is going to be a rough road for you, and perhaps publishing is not what the direction you want to go, or maybe you should possibly just keep to yourself and not read reviews and not listen to critiques and see how far you get. But even in the publishing world, you're going to get, you send it to the editor, they're just not going to give you an up or down vote. They're not going to say, no, we don't like it. They're going to send you back. If they read it, they're going to send you what they did, they're going to give you some positive feedback. But they're also going to give I'm getting.
Did somebody come on at your? Well,
Thomas, your mic is on and it's doing an echo. Thomas Rydell.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
I was wondering where that was coming from. But anyway,
I got him.
Yeah, but because look, the real world of being a writer is a lot of it can be hurtful. There is. I could show you reviews of mine that have not just criticized my writing, but me as a person. I've been called about every name. I could show you some crazy emails that I've gotten through. Just nuts stuff. but stuff, people who are being intentionally hurtful, and if that's, you do get used to it. I remember my first bad review I ever got, I didn't want to talk to anybody for 3 days. I was like, how could they have possibly said this about me? They hurt my feelings, and they did hurt my feelings. And it wasn't until I looked up and just as a goof, looked at the 1-star reviews of Tolkien. And I went, hey, if Tolkien gets 1-star reviews, who am I to say? But yeah, you just got to be aware of it, prepared for it. You're not going to be prepared for that first one, no matter how much you think you are, because that first time somebody tells you suck, it's gonna because this is a creative endeavor, and you're putting your talents on display, and with somebody to cast aspersions at those talents, it's going to hurt your feelings unless you just don't have them. And if you don't have them, you're probably not writing with enough passion to make your stories interesting. Oh, all my stuff is up there.
Yeah, I'm adding your links and our links.
Let's see. Who's my favorite character and why? Wow. Probably Lady Camden in the Bard's Blade. Well, in the Sorcerer's Song series. Lady Camden, she started out as a very two-dimensional, sort of like strong, hard-ass, woman that you see, harsh taskmaster that you see in a lot of, that's pretty stereotypical. But I didn't want to be stereotypical about her. I wanted to give her depth and give her, I wanted to flesh her out because because mainly I've seen that character done so poorly so many times, and I didn't want to do that. And it ended up being one of my favorite characters to write. I gave her, and the world of the Bard's Blade is split into two worlds. Basically, you have one side that's very fundamentalist, religious, has a lot of religious fundamentalism, very misogynistic, and the other world is a lot more open and a lot more freedoms. Well, Lady Camden lives in the misogynistic world of religious zealotry, and has thrived in that in spite of all the things, all the obstacles in her path. And not only that, she's chosen to stay. She certainly has enough wealth to leave if she wanted to, but her attitude towards it is, if I leave, how will anything ever change? If I abandon this and I have the ability to fight, I may fail, but if people like me leave, what happens? And that's kind of the way I framed her as a character. And every time as I'm writing the third and final book, I always am so excited to, come back to her part of the story. Any other questions?
Let's see.
Can I have a follow-up on that question, Brian? Do you have trouble taking a female persona and perspective in your books? Do you find that hard to do?
Not at all. I know a lot of, if I was my age in the 1980s, that I'd be a product of 1980s, 1970s, 80s environment. And that's why you see a lot of that type of writing in those days, with the exception of, there were some few notable exceptions, Terry Brooks being one. And, but even Tolkien, as brilliant as he was, wrote very shallow female characters. Even Galadriel, I always thought she should have been fleshed out more. But, he wasn't known for his character work anyway. So, I mean, that's not, that's not where his strengths were. But getting into the mind of a female is not any different than getting into the mind of anybody else. I mean, what I try to avoid doing is making the idea of femininity equate with weakness. a bad thing. I don't do that. And I see that too much, to where somebody will basically take essentially what is a male character, change their body, and they call that a strong female character. You know, I'm like, that's all you've done is change their genitalia. You haven't written a woman, you've written a guy in a woman's body. You know what I mean? And not that there's not a place for those type of characters, but you can't, it's lazy just to not, okay, say a female warrior, for example, right? Who is just a normal human in every way. You know, is not some exceptionally large woman like the lady in Game of Thrones, or hadn't some compelling reason to be as strong as a 250-pound man. Well, she's going to choose different weapons. She's going to fight differently. She's going to, she's going to have different strategies that play to her strengths. You know, to sit there, I mean, a 120-pound man wouldn't go toe-to-toe with a 250-pound man. Why would a 120-pound woman do that? That's stupid. It's lazy writing, and it's not because a woman is feminine, making being that sort of equates to weakness. I draw from my own life, and some of the strongest women I've ever met are very feminine. There's nothing wrong with femininity, and also got to realize, hey, there's more than one body type. Not everybody's drop dead gorgeous. So and it's. I try just to realize that these are actual people in an actual world, and how would they react to this in the experience I have, having been married for 18 years, having I'm not a child. I've known many women, many different types of women, and I draw from like everybody. I draw from my personal experience, because there was a reason that women didn't really read a lot of fantasy back in the 70s and 80s, because they were all wrapped around Conan's leg. I mean, nobody wants to see that. But they also don't, also, if you start portraying women in a way that is unrecognizable to women, they're not going to like that anymore. I mean, you want to put something in there that your audience recognizes. And even men, the way I've written female characters, men react to it better because they can relate to the woman there. And it's why, you see that on both sides, though. You see people writing every man is some infallible dark hero who, it's like, I'm sorry, some men are just normal guys, and I think the more a writer, they also, I could go on forever about this, but one of the big mistakes that I've seen in new writers is they think character depth equates to character flaws. And that's not true. Character flaws is a small part of that. It is not the end-all be-all of character depth. There's personality. There is their fears, their hopes, their dreams. Just because somebody is flawed, everybody's flawed. You're not giving them depth. You're just, there's so much more there. Think of when you're trying to give a character depth, whether it's male, female, what or any of the variations in between. Think about them as entire people, and not just a list of pros and cons. I mean, I could tell you where my strengths and weaknesses lies, but that's not nearly enough to define me as a person. And so when you're defining these characters, you got to keep that in mind. And it's not easy. It is so hard to it can be little things like turns of phrase that a character uses often, or the way they react to certain situations because of their past. All the way down to foods they like and don't like and why. Things that bring back memories, things that make them angry, things that that aren't necessarily flaws. It's just who they are. So anyway, sorry, I get rambling when I do all this kind of stuff.
No, it's just fine.
Any more questions?
I think that's an hour. Thank you so much. I do have one final question.
Absolutely. I got plenty of time. We're good.
Well, this will be the last one.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for participating. Since we have a bunch of college students and great learners amongst us, what's a piece of advice that you could provide for the students?
Writing advice or career advice?
Any above. Is there any piece of advice you want to share?
Okay, if you're okay, here's something practical that you can use. In the world, if you're going to be a genre writer, in the world there are this is not counting every type of profession that involves being a writer. There are, of course, journalism, nonfiction, all sorts of different ways you can apply your skills. But if you're going to be a genre fiction writer like what I do, remember, there's 15,000 roughly, according to the best estimates, 15,000 people in the entire world making a living at this. So if you're doing this because you want to be rich or famous or something like this, you are doing this for the wrong reason. There very few people ever make a living. But that's not to say you shouldn't try and that you cannot. Because, hey, somebody's got it. If somebody's going to get there, I did. And if I can, anybody can. But if my career fell apart today and I never published another word and nobody bought another book of mine, I'd continue to write my stories. I would continue to do this because I do it because I love it. And it's great if you can make a living at it, but do it because you love it. And the only way I know to get better is to do it. There's a lot of great theories, and nobody's going to be able to tell you the exact one right way to do this. Robin Hobbs famously held up a sign and said, "Anybody that tells you they know how to do it, then they don't really know." Do it and find your own voice. Write a lot. Your voice will change. Don't be afraid of failure because you're going to fail. I've failed time and time and time again. It just makes the successes that much sweeter. And it makes the times when you can look back on something that you've done and be proud of it. And, and enjoy yourself most of all.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Can everybody give Brian a good clap, hand clap? And your little hand clap, up there.
Thank you. It was like I said, it's such an honor and a privilege to be here, especially what amounts to my hometown. Yeah, Mobile's across the bay, but it's close enough. When I go out of town, nobody's heard of Fairhope. So,
oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.